The road to the White House is long and winding. The candidates have traveled from coast to coast to hear from their fellow Americans, faced tough questions, and laid out a vision for the country. Tonight, the road leads through Wisconsin, the birthplace of the Republican Party, the cradle of American industry, where winners are crowned and legends are forged. Abraham Lincoln campaigned for president just a few blocks away. Across the street, Teddy Roosevelt was shot by a would-be assassin. And in this very theater, TR campaigned with the bullet still lodged in his chest. Now, the economy is at the top of the agenda. Americans are concerned about their jobs and their families and hope that the road ahead leads to a better future. Here in Wisconsin, they have seen their fair share of partisanship, but they persevere and their spirit remains strong.
And from now on, if anyone tries to sell America short or tells me that Americans don't have the will to compete or the stamina to keep out in front, I'm going to tell them to come and see you, the people of Wisconsin.
Election day is less than a year away. The first votes will be cast in just 3 months. And for the first time, the end of the road can be seen on the horizon.
It is 9 p.m. on the East Coast, 8 p.m. here inside the Milwaukee Theater. Welcome to the Republican presidential debate here on the Fox Business Network. I'm Neil Cavuto, alongside my co-moderators Maria Bartiromo and the editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal, Gerard Baker.
Tonight, we are partnering with the Wall Street Journal to ask questions on the economy that voters want answered. We're also working with Facebook, who tells us that since the first Republican debate, more than 58 million people have joined the political conversation online. More than 9 million are talking specifically about the economy.
The candidates on stage tonight were selected based on their standing in an average of 4 national polls, those standings determining their position on the stage. And here they are. At center stage, businessman Donald Trump. Neurosurgeon Dr. Ben Carson.
Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush.
Businesswoman Carly Fiorina. Ohio Governor John Kasich. And Kentucky Senator Rand Paul.
Tonight's rules are simple. Up to 90 seconds for each answer, 1 minute for each follow-up response. And if a candidate goes over their allotted time, you'll hear this.
It sounds like a game show, but it's not. Anyway. Now, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the elephant in the room, and I'm not talking about your party's fine symbol. I'm talking about the purpose of tonight's debate. The economy and what each of you would do to improve it. No more, no less. We are focused on those issues and what you have said on those issues in your words and what your opponents have said in their words about your words. That is the agenda tonight. How each of you plans to make America better tomorrow. And so we begin. Candidates, as we gather tonight in this very august theater, just outside and across the country, picketers are gathering as well. They're demanding an immediate hike in the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Just a few hours ago, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo proposed doing the same for all state workers, the first governor to do so. Mr. Trump, as the leading presidential candidate on this stage, and one whose tax plan exempts couples making up to $50,000 a year from paying any federal income taxes at all, are you sympathetic to the protesters' cause, since a $15 wage works out to about $31,000 a year?
I can't be, Neil, and the reason I can't be is that we are a country that is being beaten on every front, economically, militarily. There is nothing that we do now to win. We don't win anymore. Our taxes are too high. I've come up with a tax plan that many, many people like very much. It's going to be a tremendous plan. I think it'll make our country and our economy very dynamic. But taxes too high, wages too high. We're not going to be able to compete against the world. I hate to say it, but we have to leave it the way it is. People have to go out, they have to work really hard, and they have to get into that upper stratum. But we cannot do this if we are going to compete with the rest of the world. We just can't do it.
So do not raise the minimum wage.
I would not raise the minimum.
Dr. Carson, you have long...
Thank you.
Dr. Carson, you have long bemoaned this lackluster recovery, and this Facebook map shows that Americans share your concern. The green represents how the jobs issue is resonating all across this nation, especially here in the state of Wisconsin. You've suggested one minimum wage does not fit all, and that perhaps we should offer a lower or starter wage for young people. Those protesters outside are looking for $15 and nothing less. Where are you?
Well, first of all, delighted to be here. My family's here, and my little granddaughter, who's 3 years old, said she wanted to come to the debate. So this is very cool. As far as the minimum wage is concerned, people need to be educated on the minimum wage. Every time we raise the minimum wage, the number of jobless people increases. It's particularly a problem in the black community. Only 19.8% of black teenagers have a job. We're looking for one. You know, and that's because of those high wages. If you lower those wages, that comes down. You know, I can remember as a youngster, you know, my first job working in a laboratory as a lab assistant and multiple other jobs. But I would not have gotten those jobs if someone had to pay me a large amount of money. But what I did gain from those jobs is a tremendous amount of experience and how to operate in the world and how to relate to different people and how to become a responsible individual. And that's what gave me what I needed to ascend the ladder of opportunity in this country. That's what we need to be thinking about. How do we allow people to ascend the ladder of opportunity rather than how do we give them everything and keep them dependent?
So, sir, just to be clear, you would not raise it?
I would not raise it. I would not raise it specifically because I'm interested in making sure that people are able to enter the job market and take advantage of opportunities.
Senator Rubio, you called the recent Democratic debate in Las Vegas a night of giveaways, including free health care, free college, and a host of other government-paid benefits. Since you aren't a fan of all they're giving away, tell us tonight what you would take back.
Well, let me begin by answering both the first question and this one, because they're related. As I've said many times before, my parents were never rich people. My father was a bartender, my mother was a maid, they worked for a living, but they were successful people. Because despite the fact that they weren't well educated and had those jobs, they made enough money to buy a home in a safe and stable neighborhood, retire with dignity, leave all four of their children better off than themselves. We call that the American dream, but in fact it's a universal dream of a better life that people have all over the world. It is a reminder that every country in the world has rich people. What makes America special is that we have millions and millions of people that are not rich, that through hard work and perseverance are able to be successful. The problem is that today people are not successful working hard as ever because the economy is not providing jobs that pay enough. If I thought that raising the minimum wage was the best way to help people increase their pay, I would be all for it, but it isn't. In the 21st century, it's a disaster. If you raise the minimum wage, you're going to make people more expensive than a machine. And that means all this automation that's replacing jobs and people right now is only going to be accelerated. Here's the best way to raise wages. Make America the best place in the world to start a business or expand an existing business. Tax reform and regulatory reform. Bring our debt under control. Fully utilize our energy resources so we can reinvigorate manufacturing. Repeal and replace Obamacare. And make higher education faster and easier to access, especially vocational training. For the life of me, I don't know why we have stigmatized vocational education. Welders make more money than philosophers. We need more welders and less philosophers. And if we do that, if we do this, we will be able to increase wages for millions of Americans, and we will be able to leave everyone better off without making anyone worse off.
Thank you, Senator Rubio.
We've asked people on Facebook to submit their questions for the candidates. Seth Bell wrote, "We are approaching $20 trillion in national debt. Specifically, what plans do you have to cut federal spending?" Governor Kasich, you have spoken much about your success in balancing the budget under President Clinton. Today, the national debt is at record highs and growing unsustainably. Interest will be the fastest growing part of the federal budget, tripling over the next 10 years. Social Security, the lifeline of millions of American seniors, is rushing toward insolvency. With all of the tax plans presented tonight, estimated to cost anywhere between $2 and $12 trillion over a decade, what specific steps will you take to balance the budget?
First of all, let me just say that in the state of Ohio, and I'm the only acting executive on this stage today, we do have a moderate increase in the minimum wage. And I got to tell you, my father carried mail on his back. His father was a coal miner. He died of black lung. He was losing his eyesight. My mother's mother lived with us. She could barely speak English. I come from a town where if the wind blew the wrong way, people found themselves out of work. And economic theory is fine, but you know what? People need help. Now, I have a plan that, in fact, would cut taxes, but not $11 or $12 trillion, that would put my children further in debt. I have a plan that would not only cut taxes, lower the income tax rate for individuals, lower the tax for businesses so businesses will compete here and not move operations overseas, and also a plan, the only plan of anybody standing on this stage, to get us to a balanced budget by the end of a second term. And, you know, the simple fact of the matter is we hear a lot of promises in this debate, a lot of promises about these tax cuts or tax schemes sometimes that I call them. Hillary and the Democrats promise everything on the spending side. We've got to be responsible about what we propose on the tax side. Yes, lower taxes, lower spending. My website, johnkasich.com, will show you exactly how we balance the budget. I balanced the budget in Washington as a chief architect, and I have balanced it in Ohio for one reason. When you balance the budget and you cut taxes, people get work. And our most important moral purpose as leaders in the political system is to make sure we create an environment for job creation so people can live their dreams and realize their God-given potential. That's why it's so important. And for those at the bottom, we've got to do what we can to train them so they can move up. But to just look the other way is not acceptable, because you know what? As the governor of Ohio, I have to deal with real challenges, and we've gotten it done in our state, and I will do it for America.
Did you want to name any specific steps, sir?
Sure. We would move the Medicare system from a 7% growth down to about a 5% growth. And I have a whole series of ways to do that. In Ohio, we reduced Medicaid funding for the poor from 10% to 2.5%, didn't cut one benefit, or didn't take anybody off the rolls. Why? Because we're innovators. I've been an innovator my entire career, and I really don't care what special interests or lobbyists have to say. I have a job to do when I take over a public office. Now, we freeze non-defense discretionary for 8 years. We also put an increase in defense spending. Our tax cuts balance out. And at the end of the day, we will get to a balanced budget. And I want everybody here to know, when I was Budget Committee Chairman in Washington, I stepped on every toe in that town, and we got to a balanced budget, and we had enormous job growth. And as governor of Ohio, we went from 350,000 lost jobs to a gain of 347,000 jobs. I'll do it in Washington. I've done it twice. I'll do it thrice for the United States of America.
Senator Cruz, the International Monetary Fund recently cut its expectations for economic growth. Many economists expect a recession to hit the U.S. within the next year due to the weakening of manufacturing. The next president will have to deal with it. You say tax reform is a powerful lever to spur economic expansion. You're calling for a 10% income tax and a 16% business tax. What other elements do you need in this plan to actually create jobs?
Well, Maria, it's great to be with you. It's great to be here in Milwaukee. You know, the question you asked really, I think, is the most important question any of us can face, which is how do we get the economy growing? How do we bring back economic growth? Because economic growth, it's foundational to every other challenge we have. As you rightly noted, from 2008 to today, our economy has grown 1.2% a year on average. The Obama economy is a disaster, and the IMF is telling us this is a new normal. It doesn't have to be. If you look at the history of America, there are three levers that government has had to facilitate economic growth. The first is tax reform, and as you noted, I have rolled out a bold and simple flat tax, 10% for every American that would produce booming growth and 4.9 million new jobs within a decade. The second element is regulatory reform, pulling back the armies of regulators that have descended like locusts on small businesses. And the third element is sound money. Every time we pursued all three of those, whether in the 1920s with Calvin Coolidge or the 1960s with JFK or the 1980s with Ronald Reagan, the result has been incredible economic growth. We have done it before, and with leadership, we can do it again.
Thank you, sir.
Excuse me.
Governor Bush.
Yeah. I would like to make a comment.
You've already made two comments, John. It's my turn.
We have more questions for you, Governor Kasich, coming up. We have more questions for you, Governor Kasich.
I got about 4 minutes last debate. I'm going to get my question right now.
I appreciate it, Jeb. I'm all for you. But I want at some point talk about a value-added tax and $11-12 trillion tax cuts that will put our kids way deeper in the hole than they have been at this point. So I'd like to talk about it at some point because that's what leadership is.
We will certainly get to that. Governor Bush.
Yeah.
Almost 40% of Americans are without a job and are not looking. Many have given up. That's what the participation rate tells us. You've said your policies will drive the economy back to 4% growth, which we haven't seen since the year 2000. What specific regulations would you change, and how will that lead to jobs and growth?
First of all, we could get to 4% growth. The new normal of 2% puts huge demands on government. The reason why we have structural deficits is that more and more people are relying on government, and the growth that we don't have makes the deficit grow. A 4% growth strategy starts with tax reform. And the proposal that I've laid out is the one the Wall Street Journal editorial board has said is the most pro-growth of all the proposals out there. We eliminate a lot of deductions and cut the rates down, a corporate rate of 20%, which puts us 5% below that of China, and allows us full expensing of investing. It would create an explosion of investment back into this country, creating higher wage jobs. And so that's part of it. On the regulatory side, I think we need to repeal every rule that Barack Obama has in terms of work in progress. Every one of them. And start over. For those that are already in existence, the regulation of the Internet, we have to start over, but we ought to do that. The Clean Power Act, we ought to repeal that and start over on that. The Waters of the United States Act, which is going to be devastating for agriculture and many industries, we should repeal that. We should repeal the rules because the economic costs of this far exceed the social benefit. And if we're serious about being serious about high growth, then we have to recognize that small businesses right now, more of them are closing than are being set up. Hillary Clinton has said that Barack Obama's policies get an A. Really? 1 in 10 people right now aren't working or have given up altogether, as you said. That's not an A. 1 in 7 people are living in poverty. That's not an A. 1 in 5 children are on food stamps. That is not an A. It may be the best that Hillary Clinton can do, but it's not the best America can do.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Fiorina, while you've all pointed out how weak the current recovery has been and how disappointing by any historical standards, in the general election, the Democrats will inevitably ask you and voters to compare the recent president's jobs performance. Now, in 7 years under President Obama, the US has added an average of 107,000 jobs a month. Under President Clinton, the economy added about 240,000 jobs a month. Under George W. Bush, it was only 13,000 a month. If you win the nomination, you'll probably be facing a Democrat named Clinton. How are you going to respond to the claim that Democratic presidents are better at creating jobs than Republicans?
Well, first of all, I must say, as I think about that question, I think about a woman I met the other day. I would guess she was 40 years old. She had several children. And she said to me, "You know, Carly, I go to bed every night afraid for my children's future." And that really struck me. This is America. A mother is going to bed afraid for her children's future. And the reason she's afraid for her children's future is because we've had problems for a long time. Yes, problems have gotten much worse under Democrats. But the truth is, this government has been growing bigger and bigger, more corrupt, less effective, crushing the engine of economic growth for a very long time. This isn't about just replacing a Democrat with a Republican now. It's about actually challenging the status quo of big government. Big government has created a big business called politics. And there are lots of people invested in the status quo of that big business called politics. Specifically, we need actually to do 5 things to really get this economy going again. We need to go to zero-based budgeting, so we know where every dollar is being spent. We can challenge any dollar, cut any dollar, move any dollar. We need to actually reform the tax code. Go to a 3-page tax code. Yes, there are plans that will reform our tax code to 3 pages. In addition to rolling back what President Obama has done, we need to do a top-to-bottom review of every single regulation on the books. That hasn't been done in 50 years. We need to pass the REINS Act so Congress is in charge of regulation, not nameless, faceless bureaucrats accountable to no one. We become a nation of rules, not a nation of laws. And finally, we actually, yes, have to hold government officials accountable for their performance. All this has to be done, and the citizens of this nation must help a President Fiorina get it done. We must take our government back.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Paul, income inequality has been rising in the United States. 50 years ago, for example, the average CEO of a big corporation in this country earned 20 times the average salary of one of his or her workers. Today, that CEO earns about 300 times the average salary of a worker. Does it matter at all that the gap between the rich and everyone else is widening?
Absolutely, and I think that we ought to look where income inequality seems to be the worst. It seems to be worst in cities run by Democrats, governors of states run by Democrats, and countries currently run by Democrats. So the thing is, let's look for root causes. But I would also lay some blame at the feet of the Federal Reserve. I think the Federal Reserve has made this problem worse. By artificially keeping interest rates below the market rate, average ordinary citizens have a tough time earning interest, have a tough time making money. They're actually talking now about negative interest. The money as it's created through quantitative easing or other means tends to start out in the big banks in New York. And because we're now paying interest for them to keep the money there, much of that money has not filtered out into the economy. So what we're finding is there is increasing income disparity and income inequality. We also find that as the Federal Reserve destroys the value of the currency, what you're finding is that if you're poor, if you make $20,000 a year and you have 3 or 4 kids and you're trying to get by, as your prices rise, or as the value of the dollar shrinks, these are the people that are hurt the worst. So really, we need to re-examine whether we want a Federal Reserve that's involved so much in determining interest rates. We also need to look at root causes as to what caused the housing boom and the housing collapse. But the bottom line is, if you want less income inequality, move to a city with a Republican mayor or a state with a Republican governor.
Thank you, Senator.
All right, we're only just getting started. Coming up, your taxes. Stick around. You're watching Fox Business.